Good morning. I'm Frank Kaufmann. I'm the director of the Professor's World Peace Academy. In our Scholars Interview series, we're very fortunate this morning to have with us Mr. Thomas Bloch. Tom Bloch is the author of 5 books. He is also a playwright. He is a 25-plus year exhibiting visual artist and founding producer of New York City's International Human Rights Art Festival. He was the founding producer of the Amnesty International Human Rights Art Festival in 2010, was a research fellow at DePaul University, was a LABA fellow, L-A-B-A. We'll find out more from Tom what that is in a moment. He was a Hamilton fellow and has been recipient of funding and support from more than a dozen foundations and organizations. Mr. Bloch has spoken about his ideas throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, Turkey, and the Middle East. His books include Shalom Salaam, A Story of a Mystical Fraternity, which will be the subject of our conversation this morning. He's written also A Fatal Attraction, War in the Name of God, Machiavelli in America, another book, Prophetic Activist Art, A Handbook for a Spiritual Revolution, and has even written a novel, The Fool Returns. We're very grateful to have Mr. Bloch with us this morning, and please join me to welcome Mr. Bloch to the program.
Frank?
Very good. Welcome, Tom. Happy to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
Great. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for sparing the time. So I'm gonna jump right in. I know you're an extremely busy man, so we're fortunate to have you with us. As I introduced you, I hit upon one of your credentials, which is a LABA fellow, L-A-B-A. I'm not even sure the pronunciation of it, but as I introduced you, I promised our hearers that you would let us know just what that is. I'm not familiar with that.
So the 14th Street Y, and they're expanding now, but the 14th Street Y is a Jewish YHDA, whatever it is, down in the East Village on 14th Street. And they have a wide range of programming open to the public. They got a basketball court. They have a beautiful black box theater. But one program they run is this fellowship where for a year, you basically read and discuss ancient biblical texts, and then you transform it into art around a theme. So the theme, the year I did it, was mother. So you're looking at the idea of mother in the Bible, in the Torah, through specific texts, and then you're interpreting your response to this through art. And I actually did a multimedia theatrical presentation myself that then grew into a CD and a dance performance. So it spawned a whole series of creative responses. And basically the theme I found that interested me the most is that the ultimate mother, the creator of the universe, is both a creator and a destroyer.
Yes.
Once you created something, it will be destroyed. So I kind of operated at this intersection between creation and destruction throughout a wide range of media. My paintings, dance, choreography, live cello music, theatrical presentation, all kind of wrapped together around this idea.
Wow, so, that's remarkable. Carry on. I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. I was just going to say every other artist in the program, and there was about a dozen of us, had a different media and a different response to this prompt of mother, plus spending a year talking about these biblical texts.
Fantastic. And the acronym is what? LABA?
I don't know. It's the Lava House of Culture.
Okay.
I don't know. They probably. I could look it up, but I don't know.
It's fine. We'll find it, and I'll write it into our interview notes. So I think there's another Uptown Y in Manhattan that also is renowned for a very elevated series of intellectual inquiry. Do
The
you know?
92nd Street Y.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was. Yeah, 92nd Street Y.
They're
So,
not they're not aligned with each other. I think the 92nd Street Y is a regular Y, you know, Young Men's Christian Association as opposed to
right.
Young Person's Hebrew Association. But I don't.
Very good. Okay, fantastic. And um, just by surprise, or I hope you don't mind, we can take this where it goes as we converse. I'm familiar with Mother as creator destroyer, especially in Hinduism, of course. And but are you saying that this is also to be found in the Torah, that Mother concept is creator and destroyer, easily and immediately recognizable or known to Jews worldwide as they study and take in Holy Scripture?
I am in no position to make a exegesis or theological commentary on the inner meaning of the Bible. I'm just saying that my personal reaction was that the creation and destruction are always inextricably linked. And Rumi, the Sufi saint, said, "There is nothing in the world that isn't good for one person, which isn't bad for someone else." So there's always a net zero, I guess, a zero sum game to creation. So once in Jewish mysticism, God removed itself to create a space for creation, because creation is not natural to the universal essence.
Mm-hmm.
Moving itself, it created time, and then it created existence within time, and in so doing, it immediately was created the idea of destruction, that things would come to an end. So that was more my response. And I'm not saying, again, it's for artists, it's not for theologians. So it's for artists to take inspiration. This program at the Lava Cultural Program, it's not for people to come have theological arguments so much as to have artistic reactions. So I wouldn't propose that I know. I'm
Got it. Yeah, one of the prior scholars in this very series is a colleague and friend of mine who lives in Vrindavan, one of the sacred areas of Lord Krishna, and we got into that very matter on creation, destruction, just in a prior interview. So that's a surprise and interesting to stumble upon that in part of meeting you and hearing about some of the history of your work. I promised the hearers, or kind of set myself up also, to focus our interview on what I believe is the first book you ever wrote. Am I correct? This is Shalom Salaam, a story of a mystical fraternity. Was that your first?
It's my first published book. Yes, I have since published 4 more, and more books on the way. But yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, hopefully we'll be able to get through a lot of your work in future conversations. But I was amazed that as it was introduced, you recall as I called you and said, "Oh my gosh, this book is so interesting," and it says it's his first work, and I thought, okay, I'm meeting a fellow that's finally published a work. But I learned in a conversation that this was actually 10 years ago, and the reason why it was sent to me, because I work in religious studies, and is that it's the 10th year anniversary of the book. Is that correct? Is that how it's kind of resurfacing in the public attention?
I think it is timeless and timely. I mean, it deals with Jewish-Muslim relations over 1,000 years, and specifically mysticism. And these ideas, they don't come into vogue and leave vogue in the way a lot of popular culture issues do. So I think my publisher felt that it was a good time to kind of remind and refresh this study, because it continues to be, I think, the preeminent work on this particular subject, which is the influence of Sufism or Islamic mysticism on the development of Jewish mysticism. and how it continues to reverberate within Jewish practice today. So there is a lot of scholarship, and certainly since my book has been published, there's been a lot of scholarship and conversation. But I still think this is the best overview of the subject. So I think that's what my publisher felt, and that's why it has found the light of day again.
Yeah, fantastic. Um, a couple of things. As I encountered it, and as I say, I misunderstood what I'm getting. I thought it was a fellow's first book, and meeting you in our conversations, I learned that now it's been published and it's on a kind of a special anniversary, which is congratulations for that. But I was amazed at how deeply and widely it was circulated. And if you look at the back cover and you see the commendations, it's from some of the preeminent scholars in the field, like your first commenter is Paul F. Kittner, who's, people die for to have those people commenting on your work. So I really commend you for getting, just in your initial work, hitting at such a high level. And I guess a good publisher is really to be commended, or part of bringing a person's work properly to the right people and to the right status. And you got to be so busy. I think you have another 2 works in the pipeline presently, but has the reintroduction on an anniversary of this work required you to dig back in, take another look? Because the next question would be, are there things that you would revise that you have since come to learn? You said there's been a lot of scholarly conversation since the publication of this Shalom Salaam. Have you kept up with the commentary and perhaps debate that you spawned?
I do, to some extent. I have a pretty wide range of academic and artistic interests. So around the time it was published, and the reason, for instance, I met Paul Knitter of the Union Theological Seminary was because this book immediately put me into an extremely important category as not only a peacemaker, but a peacemaker with a unique academic profile. So I was one of 2 invited Jewish scholars to the first, and I think only, interfaith conference at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. And so my fellow conferees were Karen Armstrong, Paul Knitter. I mean, just the absolute top of the field. And I kind of, I was there because of this unique perspective as a Jewish scholar, talking about the importance of Islam and Islamic thinking to Jewish, spiritual development. So I was able to get into a very, very high place just by the virtue of the scholarship. And let me just add that the reason I wrote this, and when I wrote this, I was a painter, a visual artist, a full-time. As I got deeper into the subject, I found a tremendous resistance among scholars to make the kind of leaps and claims and discoveries that I did. And I took this to be somewhat political. And then not only that, I had both a Jewish scholar and a Muslim scholar that I met in the course of writing this book that told me they could never write this book because they would risk their careers. Because it's so counterculture, and ultimately history is read through contemporary politics, and that's just a fact. And so this was, maybe it could only have been written by a painter. I mean, again, I had nothing to lose, right? So it was a 10-year project. It took me 10 years to put it together and get it published. And now it's been 10 years since then. But I think that I was in a unique position because I had the academic skills, but I didn't have the academic profile that I was risking.
Yeah. You anticipated my next question, because I got a kick out of reading that. I believe it may have been the preface or introduction to the book we're discussing, Shalom Salaam. That I think it's in there where you say, somebody said, why do you why do you even have the right to write it? And your answer, I think, is something like, I'm the only guy that can write it. And something like that. It's the story you just told, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
I
was,
do feel that way, and I don't mean I'm the only one with the intellectual capabilities. I'm the only one that had nothing to lose, really.
yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. Uh, Again, I haven't even come to the content, which is rich, and we will. But again, if you don't mind, I'm just not distracted, but fascinated as we go. Um, this move to create a a strong piece of scholarship from scratch, I mean, career wise from scratch. Can you speak? Can you give any like word of advice or just kind of meditations on for, because there's a lot of us in the world that, you know, there's sides of us that are unexplored or talents we think we have that we might have gone the other way. You know, you might be a scholar who loves to tinker with the clarinet or this or that. This crossover? Do you have thoughts that would be constructive for listeners who feel that they have sides of themselves that are unexplored and that might? I mean, for you to describe simply having been a visual artist at the start, and then to be at Al Azhar of all places with Karen Armstrong and Paul Nitter of all people, it's a big. I'm wondering if there's some advice or feelings or thoughts just to listeners about this phenomenon, not only the content of your writing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can speak general. I can only speak about myself generally. I mean, I wrote this book because I felt I had to, and as I did more and more research, I realized no one was going to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an empty spacer, so I actually have a book now that's being strongly considered by Routledge, which again I think I found an empty space, and that's just me personally. Um, but I would say if you were an academic who wanted to play the clarinet, and everybody would tell you you're wrong, the only way to do it is to ignore them and play the clarinet. I mean, certainly I had no in writing this book, I didn't have a lot of people patting me on the back and saying, "Boy, you're the man to write this book," you know. And
Mm-hmm.
look, Frank, I had a half dozen publishers express strong interest in this book as I was writing it and when I finished a draft. And inevitably, I would get what I called the email of death, which was, "Dear Dr. Block, please tell us more about your credentials." And that was the end. Every single publisher then would turn away. And then I happened to
Mm.
find a Sufi publisher, and the email I got back from her was a transliterated Arabic saying. And I emailed back, I said, "What does this mean?" She said, "It's an email to ward off jealousy." So I
Mm.
thought, well, I think I might have found the right publisher. And that was the last publisher. I had given up. I had given up on
Mm.
publishing this book. I had put it away, and I went and I met with someone, and they said, "Why don't you send it to this publisher?" And I had sent it to her 5 years before, and I'd withdrawn it from her because I had one of these other publishers asking me what kind of advance I expected. So then I was like, well, I'll do one more publisher, and I sent it to her, and yada yada yada, as Seinfeld would say.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, she's an academic press. She's rigorous. I went out. I flew out to Louisville, and I sat with her on the couch, and we went through the book page by page. She gave me massive revisions. She told, and she said, okay, do it, prove it. She wouldn't give me a contract. She said, "You make this book worthy of my publishing house because the subject matter is, and your research is. Now make the text worthy of my publishing house." So it was quite a process just getting to that point.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So she became your and you're speaking of the editor or the
Yep.
publisher of the place that the book is out under the imprimatur of Funds
Fons
Vitae.
Vitae,
Is
and her
that
name is Virginia Gray Henry.
very
And
good?
yeah.
Very good. And you introduce her in our just the second as a Sufi publisher.
Oh yeah, most of the
Is
texts that she publishes are translated original Sufi texts. Al-Ghazali. She also has because she's from Louisville, Kentucky. She has a whole series on Thomas Merton and spirituality. Ibn Arabi. She publishes mostly historical texts, but she also has a very strong interfaith component. And so she took this project on, which I think for her is very unusual. She just felt it had to be out there. The information was too unusual and too fresh, and no one else was going to write it. So she took it on.
Excellent. I get it. And is she a Western born Native American, not Native American, I mean, an American lady whose life brought her into interest in Sufism?
Yeah, she as a sometime in her 20s traveled across North Africa, the Maghreb, lived in Egypt for many years, went to studied Sufism, went to England. She converted to Islam, went to England, started an Islamic text. I think it's called the Islamic Text Society to translate these works. And then she, when her parents were older, moved back home to Louisville, where she was from, and started Fonds Vitae and set up shop there. But she is a practicing Muslim and a Sufi thinker.
Fantastic. You describe your drivenness as related to peace. I think your art life is also driven by a passion for peace. Is that correct? I mean, so the reason where I'm going with this is that this particular book, Shalom Salaam, it can be seen simply as an inquiry into the relationship between two mystical communities. But I believe in your case, part of what enabled you to bear the long and lonely nights that goes into that kind of research is a concern for peace itself as a thing itself. Was your art prior to this book also peace-oriented, or is your current interreligious orientation and peace among religions type of passion, is it a result of this study, or was it already existing in your long and successful career in the visual arts?
All of the work I do, and I've written a number of books. I've done visual art. I've founded something called the International Human Rights Art Festival, which is an art advocacy organization in New York and internationally. All of it operates at a intersection, at a frontier I'm not sure exists, which is between classical, historical, mystical thinking and contemporary society. Now, classical historical mysticism is very basic. It is the desire of an individual to fuse their essence with the divine essence and essentially disappear into the ocean of the divine. And it is also the desire to find the unity beneath the apparent multiplicity of what you see in front of your face. Very basic. Mm-hmm. And mysticism in all religions tracks very closely to each other. So Jewish, Islamic, Hindu, even Taoist, Christian, the ideas really fuse, and a lot of the methods fuse too, of specific methods for achieving these two very clear goals. So as say someone like Rumi or Ibn Arabi might say, there are many paths up the mountain, but they all end at the same place, and that place is the mystical heart of all these religions, which really unify the religions. So my painting definitely was concerned with that. My activism is concerned with that. All my writing has been concerned with that, to operate at the intersection of the particular and the eternal. And this book is one aspect. It's not, for me, it's part of my oeuvre. It's not necessarily led, obviously I'm very interested and I love this subject matter, and reading so in depth about Jewish and Muslim mystics really introduced me in a very profound way to these ideas. And not only the ideas, but how how much they're shared among these two religions. And then as I read Meister Eckhart, a Christian, or, Simone
Yes.
Weil or Thomas Merton, you see how these things
Yes.
reverberate through time. And then the question for me was, how can I make them relevant to today's society? And mysticism is not a part of our world the way it was 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, mystics were revered by kings. Now mystics are ignored by kings, and it's not a part, and certainly
Yeah.
here in the United States and more so in the West. So, I mean, that's kind of what I follow, that energy everywhere I go, and it leads me to many, many different places. But this book grew out of that impulse and fed back into it. And I guess, that's the
Yeah.
long way of saying what I was going to say.
Yeah. It's clear. You've expressed yourself clearly. Thank you. Again, another thing that pops up rather than a preset from my list of questions. Do you find that the influence of tech and social media it can be damaging to the types of emptiness and stillness and the kind of patience needed for mystical attainment? Do you think that the potential for I find people of this world have massive potential personally, and mysticism could abound the same way medicine abounds, in my view. But I'm wondering if you feel that the impact of the titillation of media that's always in your hand and always scrolling by is like the enemy of the types of elements that you need to have mystical experience or mystical awareness. Do you have a thought on that?
I mean, my only thought is that everybody makes their own choices. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
makes their own choices. So if people want to spend their time playing with something that's 3 by 2 inches, I'm not going to stand in their way. I mean, I think it's a way of
Mm-hmm.
managing anxiety. I think we're Rome in the year 500 AD. I think our civilization, I mean, I have my own views on the hysteria of progress. But again, I don't think you don't have to live in that world. It may be harder to choose not to, but there's always
Mm-hmm.
been, you can read Roman tracts where someone says, the youth of today, this is in 100 BC, the youth of today are
Right.
completely out of control. We're all going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, so I
Right.
don't know that these dynamics have changed. The digital revolution has added another layer of anxiety, both producing and numbing activity. But I think this is human nature. Just reworking
Mm-hmm.
it.
That's encouraging. That's an encouraging view. So the ways and the stillness and the time and the patient to pursue mystical life it requires a lot of patience, a lot of discipline, and so it's helpful for your perspective to hear that it's there, it's available, the time is available, and people so inclined have it within them to pursue it and attain it as has always been in history. I like that. Just getting a little bit into the work itself, Shalom Salaam. You mentioned that you found little or no evidence or support for something that one thinks should have been in front of everybody's nose. That if everybody knows the Golden Era and the work of Maimonides in the Iberian Peninsula, but for you to hit upon that relationship, which I thought might have been there to guess, but you mentioned that the first time you find support is in a little known work or the research of Paul Fenton out of the Sorbonne. Is that accurate? Did I read that
Well,
correctly?
the very first inkling I had of this relationship and what sparked my interest was not Paul Fenton, because I wasn't reading academic texts at that time. It was a book by a discredited Islamic scholar named Idris Shah, who in his book called The Sufis, unfootnoted, mentioned about five influences of Jewish medieval thinkers being directly influenced by Sufism. And with something like a line that would say, "As everybody knows." When I talked with my publisher, she said you can't use him. He's completely discredited. But he opened the door for me, and then as I looked into it, this whole world unfolded. And I mean, Fenton, 19th century articles in obscure literary, academic magazines, and pieces of books and published, 300 copies by Moshe Yedel. And so this whole world kind of flowered for me, and all the dots connected. But it began when I was just doing reading, because I'd never heard of Sufism, and I picked up a book that said the Sufis, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. So it began in that I was living in Spain at the time, and I was painting and doing a lot of reading around mysticism and mystical ideas, and that just sparked for me something. And why, again, when something sparks, I follow. There's a lot of reasons not to follow when you feel an intuition. I follow. So I just followed that moment to this moment, 20 years later.
Beautiful. Another great piece, another gem that's valuable for listeners of any stripe, whether they're theologically or religiously oriented. But that wisdom and discipline, that's not a discipline, it's your nature, but to follow the impulses is really wise advice. So this, you said his name is Idris Shah?
That's the
Shah?
discredited.
Yeah. Now, did you ever find out why, and did you resurrect him, or is he pretty much was discredited?
No, he's
for a good
I
reason?
would if you said to me, Tom, what's the one book that I should read on Sufism, I'd say Tales of the Dervishes by Idris Shah. He just takes tales from the history of Sufism. The book I read was his own interpretation of the history of the Sufis, and in that respect, he's discredited. But I think he's well respected as a collator, as an understander. I think one of the issues was he claimed to be a Sufi, but he was no Sufi. So I think that had an issue. I mean, I certainly don't claim to be a mystic, and I hope you aren't under the impression I am. I'm fascinated, and I love mystical thinking. I'm no mystic, I mean, I'm a man.
I understand. No. I'm not.
Don't accuse me of being
to...
a mystic, my friend.
If you show up on your door with barefoot and waiting for
show up with some good scotch, and I'll let you in. Show up like that.
All right, I'll decide which one to do. So I think I'm going to jump into a couple of broad things rather than hit on the list of specifics that we shared prior to this call. One of them is, there seems to be somewhat of a pinwheel. As I read your work, as I read this book, and loved it, because I love the subject matter anyway. Similar to you, I love mystical reality and the touch point in the world's religions that they provide real hope for better relationships. Mystics. What I want to talk is a general subject, and see if you have any opinion on it. And it's all throughout your work. Is what I call what struck me as a pinwheel. It's kind of like, who's first? What's first? Who's influencing who? Where did it all start? I think that for believers and for people of faith and for people who want to identify with the tradition, whether or not it's healthy or not, there will be a very strong push from within to want to know, is this originally Jewish thought that's coming back into Judaism after a time of the Jews kind of in diaspora and under persecution and oppression? They finally get under the Muslim leadership. They're released from certain types of oppression prior. they begin to think the language is helping them and so forth, and they start to revive or revitalize a lot of Jewish thought. If you're a Jew or if you're a Muslim, there's a kind of a lingering question behind whose is it? Who's starting it? Am I getting my own thought back through the Sufis if I'm Jewish? Or is Islam so fantastic that it's giving even Jews insights into their own religion for the first time? Or do you see what I mean by a
Oh yeah.
pinwheel or this? Where does this? Okay, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I think it's an important
Okay. I
some
will.
thread.
I'll
Yeah.
address that. So in the book, I did definitely address that. So the Jewish Sufis, and these were, as I note, not Jews who viewed themselves as Sufis or Islamic, but Jews who were so strongly attracted to Sufi ways that they're the ones who brought Sufism in. And this is 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th century Jews. They definitely said, and they had a lot of problems with their contemporary Jews. They would try, these were leaders. This was Moses Maimonides and Abraham Maimonides. These were leaders of the Jewish people in the diaspora.
Yes.
And they definitely would say, we are reclaiming lost Jewish spirituality. And they would read the
Yes.
Sufi ideas back into the text. But as one academic said, they did violence to the original text to get the Sufi ideas in there. Because there were definitely things that were completely heretical in the 7th century that by the 13th century were considered traditional Jewish prayer and worship. And that was entirely because of the influence of Sufism. However, these Jewish Sufis who were taking the ideas in definitely tried to read them back into the past. They were often, they were condemned, they were called heretics, they were tried to be removed from their temporal positions as rabbinical leaders. So there was a lot of pushback by Jews at the time, but they definitely consider themselves to be reclaiming the original Jewish mysticism from the Bible.
Very good. Okay, that's very helpful. And regardless of what's true or what's false on it, it's very helpful. Your explanation is clear. And now, how about Jewish influence on Sufi thought? Was there any acknowledgement, or was that tortured in a way to get that in there, or was it easier for Muslim mystics or Sufis to thankfully take in mystical insights from their fellow the Jews under their
Judaism and Jewish thought deeply influenced, obviously, the beginning of Islam and the growth of Islam intellectually. There were original Jewish followers of the Prophet. As one imam, I gave a talk at a mosque, and he came up to me and he said, "You should be Muslim." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because the Quran's like 80% about the Jews, So there is obviously a very strong both Jewish religious, theological, and mystical influence from the Talmudic scholars of the 2nd to the 7th century. However, as a Jewish academic and as a Jewish activist, I didn't feel another book telling Muslims how lucky they are to have Jews was really what the world needed. Written by a Jewish academic, to have Judaism, I didn't feel as an activist and as an advocate for across interfaith bridges, I didn't feel that book was a book I would or could write. That book is there, and I would encourage a Muslim thinker to write that, but I think they'd have even more problems than a Jewish thinker. I mean, the political situation is really antithetical to this kind of cross-cultural academic work, and I ran into that. I mean, I had Jewish religious leaders try to kill the publication of this book,
Right. This is one thing I was wondering about as I read it. That it seems to contain elements that would activate Jewish pushback
Yeah, it did.
somewhat. It did. Okay. Uh, in that regard, one thing I was wondering is, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. By studying mystics and scholars, in a certain way, you're studying people who are the least likely of any community to be troublemakers of a harsh and narrow way. It's other forms of religious positions of authority, jobs, work, the political implications of religion, and also the ecclesiological implications of religion. Those people, if we were to study the history of a similar period, are more likely to have trouble about them vis-a-vis their embrace or acceptance of traditions not their own. So I'm wondering if the focus on the mystics and scholars colors a view that there was far greater intimacy than in fact may have been the case in these environments that
Well,
you
I have a
studied.
chapter on the cultural interaction, and I think in terms of the interaction on a day-to-day level, the interaction between Jews and Muslims from the 8th till the 14th century was as strong as it's ever been. Um, and it's
Yes,
not
that's
just the
true.
mystics, and the mystic spiritual relationship grew out of, I mean, there were Jewish generals of Muslim armies. There were Jewish viziers to Muslim princes. There were, there was a very strong interrelationship culturally. Jews studied the Quran. Jews remade the Jewish grammatical structure based on Arabic. So it was more the spiritual overlap, I think, grew out of this cross-cultural ferment. So at the time, I don't think it was just the mystics or the
The elite,
right.
the
It was,
enlightened
but there was
sector.
also,
Right.
I mean, there was a Taliban-like movement that swept out of Morocco and drove Maimonides from Cordoba, and he might have converted to Islam to save his life. I mean, there were obviously many cross-cultural issues, but that, for instance, that the Almohads that swept out of the Atlas Mountains hated the kind of more secularized or open-minded Muslims as much as they hated the Jews, right? I mean, that's like we see that with the Taliban
Got
today.
it.
They're blowing up
Yeah,
Sufi temples all over the South Asia. So
that's right.
it's
Understood.
again, I don't think
Understood.
dynamics change that much. I think technology changes, but I don't think human dynamic changes that much, in my opinion.
Yeah, well said. Okay, that's helpful and clear. The Jews were a people with their own territory and own land. Admittedly, it came and went, came and went. Half the time they were driven out of it. Half the time they were ruled by others, like at the time of at the zero calendar date. I forget where it's. The Romans are running that area, and they're under somebody else's rule at that time. But after the diaspora, the collapse of time on the land, they're always under somebody else's larger political authority. And so I'm wondering your views or sense of when things are two, like the lesser of two evils. So you write of how much better it is for the Jews under Muslim rule than they were under their Christian oppressors prior to the spread of Islam. And as I'm reading your work with the embrace of Muslim scholars, the embrace of Arabic language, the embrace of Muslim art and culture and things like that. And here's what I'm just going to ask your thoughts on this. I'm thinking a lot about the Jews in late 19th century, early 20th century, who are just delighted in Christian culture. They're becoming the great scientists, the great musicians, the great composers. They are, they're kind of, again, kind of flourishing with grand genetic talent in lands that are not their own. And then suddenly there's this horror of no, sorry, you're not Christian. You'll never be Christian. You're kind of only partially welcome here. So it's a little bit, I was wondering, as I read about this golden era, um, about the kind of unspoken psychological reality of forever the outsider, forever the foreigner. Well, if well behaved, you're okay around here. We know dhimmi status and extra taxes and things like that. Do you hear the parallel that I'm asking about? I'm just wondering your own thoughts on
I
this.
don't feel the pressures under the Islamic world ever got to the point until recently, due to politics, that post World War II, but ever got to the point that they were in Europe. I mean, there was in Europe, really from about the 4th century, just a pervasive, overwhelming
Correct.
anti-Semitism that never relented and just led in an inexorable line for 1,500 years to the
Correct.
Holocaust. There was nothing like that in the
Yes.
Islamic world. Even up to World War II, Jewish communities were part of and valued in places like Morocco, in Baghdad. In 1905, Baghdad was as Jewish as New York is today. It was 20% Jewish. The whole city was shut down on Yom Kippur.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just there was
Right.
never the pervasive. I think the problems. Well, I mean, all religions think they're right and everybody else is wrong. But to be fair, Islam is the only religion that has protections from minority religions written into it. You mentioned dhimmi
Right.
status and a negative.
That is
It also has a
right.
positive in that these Jews and
That's
Christians
right.
were allowed to practice their religion in a medieval world where no other religion respected or acknowledged the rights of other religions. Oh,
Absolutely. I agree. I completely agree there. It was to say otherwise would be the classic crime of blaming people from the past by modern standards. And the only other efforts ever at trying to create free religious expression has always been under secular designs. There's never been written into
America,
sacred vision
America might,
a special
France,
America's
whatever.
yeah, we do have an ideal of equal religious practice, but it isn't arising out of a sacred revelation or scripture that the Muslims had. So yeah, that's for sure. And then the theological clash between Christians and Jews vis-a-vis the person of Jesus is extreme and has created that unbroken line that you just described. But yeah, so just to get back a tiny bit, um, I think that the unwritten part of permanent minority, institutionalized minority, while it was visionary for the time, it still has an impact on a community and culture, I think.
Oh, I mean, has a lot of. I mean, look again. This is sociology, anthropology, psychology, what have you. It's not really my bailiwick, but I mean, the Jewish
Mm-hmm.
experience in the world, which is people hate that who they can see next to them, and I've had this experience traveling around the world where you go into a community and they hate their neighbor, whether it's Greece and Albanians or Germans, Turks, whatever.
Yep,
So the
yep.
Jews were always the neighbor, so everybody hated them. That's my opinion of anti-Semitism. I really don't think there's anything more to it than that. I just think they were always the minority, and the majority always hates the minority. And you can insert all the different permutations, but the Jews are always there in every community in the world. But being under pressure, it's
Okay.
obviously very
Mm-hmm.
negative, but it made the community hold together. So when the Dalai Lama left Tibet and his Tibetans his country disintegrated, and the Tibetan people dispersed. He went to Israel to try to see how a community could hold together for 2,000 years without a state. So I mean, it's like Rumi said, there's nothing that isn't good for one person that's bad for another. You could say the same about there's nothing that's not good for you as an individual that's also bad for you, whatever that is. I mean, you have a great meal, well, it's clogging up your arteries. I mean, I just it's very complicated. I mean, I'm not trying. Anti-Semitism is terrible. Racism is terrible, but in my opinion, it's no different. I think hatred of the other is a human dynamic, whether you call it I'm anti-black, I'm anti-Jew, I'm anti-Muslim. To me, it's the same dynamic. And it's just pointed at the people that are closest to you in a minority. I mean, that's my opinion.
Very well said. That's very well said. Can I, we're kind of close to time. Can I close with, you wrote this in a desire to bring to light elements that could help people transcend misunderstanding and false understanding of historical enmity and things like that. Have you had some nice feedback? Have people come back to you? Has there been writing or phone calls, or have you seen some of the fruits of what might have been the best fruits of such an effort that has this kind of peace thread or peace DNA in its impulse and in your labors? Anything?
I'll just tell one experience. There was a mosque in Buffalo. They were having a lot of problems. They were, people were driving by and putting up signs that said terrorists and this and that. And they were Sunni, Syrian Muslim for the most part, and they were very religious. And they kind of got together and they said, we can't just wall ourselves off here. Because if you wall yourself off, people are going to look at you with suspicion. And again, this goes back to Jewish shtetls, whatever. We have to, but it's different in America because there's an ability to engage in this particular society at this particular time. So they got together and they said, we have to engage with the community. So they actually, part of their engagement activities was to host me, to bring me out, to talk about this story and use it as a way to interface with a local synagogue. So there was a huge event. I mean, I spoke before 200 people. There were more intimate dinners with leaders from both communities, and they used it literally as a bridge to their social and, locally political situation as a way to say, we're religious Muslims and we have our own beliefs, but we're part of this community and we want to engage with the community. So that was a very specific way that this scholarship and then my presentation of it was able to really soften the earth for conversation between two religious communities, and I think there were a lot of Jewish people that went to this mosque to see me who had pushback in their community. And so, I mean, there was some real courage and some real risk in this situation for the participants. But that was certainly the kind of thing that was the point of this research. I think history is only relevant to the extent it can inform and influence the present. I'm not an academic in the sense of I'm going to do a study of something, we'll leave it back there, and I'm going to go to conferences. I think it's only relevant in terms of how it can genuinely influence society today. And that's all my academic work, of which has been a fair amount, and there will be more, to make that bridge to the present, and then within the present, in this case, to build bridges within a community and outside of Buffalo. So that was exciting.
Nice, perfect. That's tremendous. In the middle of that account, you spoke of you mentioned two qualities: courage.
Courage takes many forms. Again, a lot of academics that I talked to when I was writing this book were like, I don't want to risk my job. So is that a lack of courage, or is it just good, smart?
That's exactly the question, isn't it?
But I mean, I've always been fortunate, as I say, that I've never had anything to lose, so there's nothing to risk. I mean, and I've been very fortunate in that respect. So that was never an issue for me. So I'm not sure it took courage, but It took time, energy.
There you go. Yeah. There's so you carry that humility. I'm familiar with when you don't know how you would have behaved in other circumstances. You don't claim the virtue, especially. I'm very familiar. So a lot of great gems have come out from your kind of impromptu and spontaneous thoughts, and I'm very grateful, Tom, that you took time with us today.
Well, Frank, I really appreciate your taking the time, and it's great to talk a little bit about the book, and hope that maybe a few more people will see it, and it'll have a little bit more influence. So thank
Thanks
you very,
too.
very much.
Hope we talk again. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye, Frank.